Mike Thompson was walking his fence line at sunset when he heard it, the weak neighing of a horse in pain. Following the sound, he found her, a beautiful thoroughbred with a deep gash in her leg, collapsed in his south pasture. Mike didn't have much. His farm was struggling, and the bank payments were late again, but he knew what he had to do. For 3 days straight, he stayed with that horse, cleaning her wound, feeding her by hand, and sleeping in the barn to check on her through the night. He had no idea that somewhere in New York City, Katherine Windsor, CEO of a billion-dollar company, was frantically searching for her missing prize mare. As dawn broke on the 4th day, the sound of helicopter blades cut through the morning. Here, Mike's simple act of kindness was about to change his life forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning before finding the horse, Mike Thompson stood at his kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills that seemed to grow taller with each passing week. The red final notice stamps had become so common they barely registered anymore. He took a long sip of black coffee from a chipped mug, his father's old saying echoing in his mind, "A Thompson always finds a way." Finding a way had gotten harder since Dad passed. The drought last summer had hit them hard, and the equipment repairs this spring had eaten through what little savings he had left. Now, in the warm Kentucky June, Mike was running out of ways. He set the coffee down and picked up his veterinary school acceptance letter from 8 years ago, creased and worn from countless readings. 2 semesters completed before his father's heart attack brought him home to save the farm. The partial degree hadn't been enough to get his license, but it had given him enough knowledge to keep the livestock healthy, most of the time. The ancient refrigerator hummed in protest as Mike pulled out a half-empty carton of eggs. His breakfast routine hadn't changed in years: 2 eggs, toast from day-old bread, and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. The kitchen radio crackled with the morning farm report. Crop prices down again, more small farms being bought up by corporations. Through the window, Mike watched the sun climbing over his 100 acres. The land wasn't much by modern standards, but it had been in the Thompson family for 4 generations. His great-grandfather had bought it with savings from the coal mines. His grandfather had expanded it during the good years after the war, and his father had modernized just enough to keep it viable through the tough years of the 90s. Now it was Mike's turn, and he was watching it slip away, acre by acre. The morning chores at least gave him purpose. He moved through them with the efficiency of long practice, feeding the handful of dairy cows they had left, checking the chicken coops, and testing the irrigation system they jury-rigged last month. Each task was a reminder of better days. The barn that once housed 30 head of cattle now held just 8, the eastern field lying fallow because he couldn't afford the seed. By mid-morning, the June heat had him sweating through his work shirt. He paused to wipe his brow, leaning against the fence post his father had set 20 years ago. The wood was weathered but solid, like everything else the old man had built. A familiar ache settled in his chest, not just grief for his father, but for the way of life that seemed to be vanishing around him. His phone buzzed in his pocket, another text from Sarah at the bank. She'd been kind enough to give him extensions before, but her messages lately had taken on a more official tone. The bank wouldn't wait forever. They had investors interested in the land, she'd told him. Last week. Prime location for development, they said, as if generations of agricultural heritage could be reduced to real estate potential. Mike pocketed the phone without responding. He'd make it to the bank tomorrow, try to explain again. Maybe Sarah would remember how her father and his had worked together during the flood of '97, when the whole community had pulled together to save each other's farms. But community wasn't what it used to be. The Wilsons had sold out last year, their cornfields now sprouting luxury homes. The Hendersons' place had become a wine-tasting venue, their barn converted to host weekend tourists from the city. Change was coming to this part of Kentucky. Whether Mike liked it or not, He made his way to the tool shed, cataloguing repairs he couldn't afford. The tractor needed new belts, the irrigation pump was on its last legs, and the fence line had more patches than original posts. His father's tools hung on the wall, each one in its designated spot. The old man had been particular about organization. Mike ran his fingers over the worn handles, remembering summer afternoons spent learning their proper use. A distant rumble of thunder prompted him to check the weather radar on his phone. The forecast showed storms moving in by evening. He'd need to check the fence line before dark, make sure nothing had worked loose since the last patch job. That's when he'd hear it, the sound that would change everything. But for now, Mike Thompson was just another struggling farmer, trying to keep his family's legacy alive one day at a time. The medical bills from his father's final months lay buried at the bottom of the stack on his kitchen table, a reminder of the impossible choices he'd faced. The farm or treatment, the doctors had essentially said. His father had made the choice for him. The land stays in the family, son. Promise me that. Mike had promised. He just wasn't sure how much longer he could keep that promise. Katherine Windsor's corner office on the 52nd floor of Windsor Tower commanded a view of Manhattan that tourists paid good money to see. At this hour, with the sun setting behind the city skyline, the effect was particularly dramatic. But Katherine wasn't admiring the view. Her attention was fixed on the tablet in her hands, displaying a live stream from her private stables in Kentucky. "Still no sign of her, Ms. Windsor?" the stable manager reported through the video call. "We've got search teams covering a 20-mile radius, but with the storms moving in..." Katherine's perfectly manicured fingers tightened around the tablet. "Expand the search, whatever it costs. Starlight isn't just any horse." After ending the call, she moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection ghosting against the darkening sky. The Wall Street Journal cover framed on her wall caught her eye. Katherine Windsor, the queen of digital innovation. The article had praised her business acumen, her ruthless efficiency, her billion-dollar empire built from a simple app idea. What it hadn't mentioned was the loneliness at the top. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "You're 7. O'clock cancelled, Miss Windsor. Would you like me to move up tomorrow's board meeting?" "No, James. Have my helicopter ready instead. I'm flying to Kentucky tonight." A pause. "The weather reports indicate severe storms in that region." "Then find me a pilot who can handle storms." Katherine's heels clicked against marble as she crossed to her private elevator. The office was exactly as she liked it, pristine, modern, everything in its place, like her life, until 3 days ago, when Starlight had somehow escaped during a routine evening walk. The elevator descended smoothly to the private garage level. Her driver was already waiting with the car door. "Open the heliport, Thomas." As they glided through Manhattan traffic, Katherine's mind drifted to the day she'd first seen Starlight. The mare had been a rescue, emaciated and terrified, her racing career cut short by an unscrupulous owner. Something in those frightened eyes had called to Katherine. Perhaps she'd recognized a kindred spirit, another creature pushed too hard, too fast by those who valued profit over welfare. She'd paid triple the mare's worth, poured resources into her rehabilitation. Watching Starlight recover, seeing her learn to trust again, had awakened something in Katherine that decades of business success hadn't touched. The horse became more than a pet. She was proof that second chances existed, that not everything in life could be reduced to profit margins and quarterly reports. The helicopter was prepped and waiting when she arrived. Her pilot, Reynolds, knew better than to mention the weather. He'd flown her through worse, back when Windsor Enterprises was just a startup, and every investor meeting had been crucial. "Latest search grid updates are loaded into the navigation system," he reported as she buckled in. "We've got about a 3-hour window before the worst of the storm hits." Katherine nodded, her expression set. Below them, Manhattan's lights blurred into rivers of gold as they lifted off. She'd built her empire by trusting her instincts, by seeing patterns others missed. Right now, those instincts were pulling her towards Kentucky with an urgency she couldn't explain. Her phone buzzed, another message from the board. The annual shareholder meeting was in 2 days. They expected her to announce the company's expansion into artificial intelligence, a move that would potentially double their market value. Instead, she was flying into a storm to search for a horse. They wouldn't understand, she murmured to herself, watching the city recede beneath them. The board saw Starlight as just another asset, a valuable thoroughbred whose loss would impact the company's prestigious racing stable. They didn't know about the late nights Katherine had spent in the stable, sharing her secrets with the only living creature who asked nothing of her in return. The helicopter banked south, and Katherine closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw Starlight, as she'd been 3 days ago, proud, strong, finally whole again. The mare's recovery had inspired Katherine to start a rehabilitation program for other rescued horses. Though she'd kept that project private, it wouldn't fit with her public image. Katherine Windsor, the ice queen of tech, going soft over injured animals. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Somewhere below, in the darkness between the cities, her most precious investment was lost and possibly hurt. Katherine Windsor had built her fortune by fixing broken things, algorithms, companies, market strategies. But she'd learned more about healing from one wounded horse than from all her years in the corporate world. "Hold on, girl," she whispered into the storm. "I'm coming." The trophy gleamed in its case at Windsor Stables, catching the first light of dawn. Kentucky Derby, 2nd place, Starlight's promise. It was the race that should have launched a legendary career, the day everything went wrong. The stables, security footage played on multiple screens in the guard station, each showing a different angle of Starlight's last known whereabouts. Jim Martinez, head of security, rewound the tape for the 10th time. One moment the mare was being led to, her evening bath the next, chaos. A sudden clap of thunder, a startled stable hand losing his grip, and Starlight bolting through the partially opened gate. "Play it again," said Detective Roberts, squinting at the footage. The local police usually didn't handle missing horse cases, but when a billionaire's prize thoroughbred disappears, protocols change. "She's spooked by the thunder," Jim explained, "but look at her movement. She's not running randomly. She's heading southwest, following the old trail line." The detective made another note. Behind him, a cluster of reporters had gathered at the stable's entrance, held back by security. The story was too good to ignore. Billionaire tech CEO's championship horse vanishes without a trace. "Ms. Windsor's office is offering a $100,000 reward," a reporter announced into her camera. The horse, valued at over $2 million, was a rising star in the racing world before a controversial injury sidelined her career 3 years ago. Inside the stable, Dr. Sarah Chen, Starlight's veterinarian, reviewed the mare's medical history with the search team. She had just completed her final rehabilitation assessment. 3 years of careful treatment, building back her strength. Katherine was planning to announce the rehabilitation program next week, with Starlight as the flagship success story. The thick medical file told a story of patience and dedication. Weekly progress reports, detailed recovery plans, specialized therapy sessions. What it didn't show was Katherine Windsor sitting for hours in Starlight's stall, talking softly to the frightened mare in those early days after the rescue. "The injury should have ended her career," Dr. Chen continued. "The previous owner had pushed her too hard, too young. When Katherine bought her, most experts recommended euthanasia, but—" "Katherine?" She smiled slightly. "She said she didn't build a technology empire by accepting other people's limitations." The search teams gathered their gear, preparing for another day of combing the countryside. The storm had washed away most tracks, but they had infrared, drones, tracking dogs, and dozens of volunteers from local riding clubs. On social media, "Your confined Starlight" was trending. Horse lovers shared the story, attracted by the tale of the rescued champion and her billionaire savior. Tech bloggers spun theories about corporate espionage and ransom demands. Racing enthusiasts debated the mare's potential value as a broodmare. Catherine's PR team had prepared a statement, carefully worded to maintain her professional image while expressing appropriate concern. She'd ignored it, instead posting a simple personal message. "She saved me as much as I saved her. Please help us bring her home." The post had gone viral, humanizing the normally reserved CEO. Comments poured in from around the world, people sharing stories of their own bonds with animals, their own experiences of healing through horses. Few knew the full story behind Catherine's dedication, how she'd discovered Starlight during one of the darkest periods of her life, when the pressures of running a global corporation had driven her to the brink of burnout. The mare's fight for recovery had rekindled something in Katherine, a reminder that not everything worthwhile could be measured in stock prices and market shares. As the morning wore on, more media vans arrived. A local news helicopter circled overhead, adding to the chaos. Inside Starlight's empty stall, the morning sun illuminated the special equipment Katherine had commissioned: the therapeutic swimming pool, the custom-designed support boots, the magnetic therapy blankets. She spared no expense, Dr. Chen told the detective. But it wasn't about the money. "I've worked with wealthy horse owners before. They usually want quick fixes, miraculous recoveries." Katherine insisted on doing everything by the book, no matter how long it took. The vet picked up a framed photo from the stall wall. Katherine and Starlight at last month's benefit for retired racehorses. The mare's coat gleamed with health, her eyes bright and confident. Katherine's smile in the photo was rare and genuine, her usual corporate mask softened by real joy. 3 years, Dr. Chen mused. 3 years of daily therapy, setbacks and breakthroughs, building trust and strength. And now, she gestured at the empty stall. Outside, the search teams mounted up, heading out for another day of searching. The storm had passed, but dark clouds still lurked on the horizon. Somewhere out there, a wounded champion was lost and alone. And with each passing hour, the chances of finding her diminished. The old first aid kit sat unopened in Mike's barn for years, a relic from his veterinary school days. Now, kneeling beside the injured horse in the gathering dusk, he wiped dust off the latches with trembling hands. Inside, supplies that had seemed excessive when he'd assembled them, as an eager student suddenly felt desperately inadequate. The mare's breathing was labored, her dark coat slick with rain and sweat. The gash on her leg wasn't fresh, probably 2 or 3 days old, with signs of infection setting in. She was trying to keep weight off it, but the way she'd collapsed suggested exhaustion more than injury. "Easy, girl," Mike murmured, keeping his voice low and steady. He'd learned that trick from his father. Horses respond to the emotion in your voice more than the words. The mare's ears twitched toward him, but her eyes remained wary. Thunder rolled overhead as Mike assessed the wound. His partial veterinary training felt like a lifetime ago, but some knowledge was muscle memory. The cut needed cleaning, antibiotics, and proper bandaging. He had basic supplies in the kit, but nothing like what a wound this serious required. The mare tried to pull away when he touched her leg, but she was too weak to put up much fight. Up close, Mike could see she was no ordinary horse. Her conformation, even in this state, spoke of expensive breeding, the remains of professional. Wrapping on her other legs suggested high-level care. "Someone's looking for you," he said softly, unpacking gauze and antiseptic. "But right now, you're stuck with me." A quick check of her gums showed slight dehydration. Mike glanced at his watch then, at the darkening sky. The feed store would be closed by now, and he didn't have the right kind of electrolytes on hand. He'd have to make do with what he had. The mare tensed when he began cleaning the wound. But something in her manner told him she was used to medical treatment. She knew the routine even if she didn't know him. Mike worked as gently as he could, talking softly all the while. "My old professors would fail me for this," he admitted, improvising with what he had. "But they're not here, and you can't wait for perfect." He used up half his supplies just on the initial cleaning. The wound was deep enough to need stitches, but that was beyond both his skills and his supplies. He'd have to trust in pressure, bandaging, and the horse's natural healing ability. Rain began to fall as he finished the bandaging. The mare needed shelter, but moving her would be a challenge. The main barn was too far, but there was an old storage shed nearby. It wasn't ideal, but it would keep her dry. "Okay, girl," he said, standing slowly. "Time for the hard part." It took nearly an hour to coax her to her feet. Every few steps they had to stop and rest. Mike supported as much of her weight as he could, guiding her slowly toward the shed. By the time they made it inside, they were both soaked and exhausted. The shed wasn't much, but it was dry. Mike laid down what clean straw he had, made sure she had water within reach, and improvised a temporary rope barrier to keep her from trying to wander out. "I'll be right back," he promised, though he knew she couldn't understand. Or maybe she could. Something in those dark eyes seemed to hold more intelligence than he'd expected. Back at the house, Mike surveyed his meager medical supplies. Most of what he had was meant for his small herd of dairy cows. Not ideal for a horse, especially one that looked like it was used to top-tier care. He grabbed what he could carry, along with his old sleeping bag and the battery-powered lantern. The mare nickered softly when he returned, a sound that tugged at something in his chest. She was starting to trust him, just a little. Now, he just had to figure out how to help her with resources he didn't have. By the second morning, Mike's last bag of premium feed was half empty. He'd been saving it for his pregnant dairy cow, but the injured mare needed the nutrition more. He measured out another careful portion, trying not to think about what he'd do when it ran out. "You're looking better," he told her, watching her eat. The fear in her eyes had faded, replaced by something like recognition. She'd even let him check her bandages without flinching, though the wound beneath them still worried him. His phone buzzed. Another message from the bank. He ignored it, focusing instead on mixing antibiotics into the mare's water. He'd used up the last of his injectable medicines yesterday, forcing him to get creative with what remained. The mare's head lifted suddenly, ears pricking toward the east. Mike heard it too, distant thunder. Her muscles tensed, but when he placed a gentle hand on her neck, she stayed calm. "Bad experience with storms?" he asked softly. "Don't blame you, but you're safe here." The words felt hollow even as he said them. Nothing was safe here anymore. Not with foreclosure looming. The thought of losing the farm was bad enough. Now he had another life depending on him. Throughout the day, he split his time between basic farm chores and caring for the mare. His other animals were starting to notice the extra attention she was getting. Even his most reliable milk cow gave him a reproachful look during the evening milking. "Don't you start," he told her, patting her familiar flank. "Sometimes we have to help those who need it most." It was his father's philosophy. During the flood of '97, they'd taken in 3 families who'd lost their homes. Mike remembered his mother worrying about their own limited supplies, and his father saying, "The more you give, the more you have." He hadn't understood it then. He wasn't sure he understood it now, but something about it felt right. That night, checking the mare's wound by lantern light, Mike noticed subtle changes in her bearing. The premium feed was helping. Her coat had more shine, her eyes more alertness, but it was more than that. When he moved around her stall, she tracked him with interest rather than wariness. "You've done this before," he realized, noting how she shifted her weight to make his work easier. "Someone trained you well." The wound itself was showing small signs of improvement, though proper veterinary care would make a world of difference. Mike had considered calling the local vet, but Dr. Hansen would want payment up front. Besides, a horse of this quality would raise questions he couldn't answer. Lightning flashed outside, followed by a crack of thunder that shook the shed. The mare trembled, but held her ground, drawing comfort from Mike's steady presence. He found himself telling her about the farm, about his father, about the dreams he'd had to set aside. "Guess we've both seen better days," he said, checking her water one last time. The mare nudged his shoulder gently, the first time she'd initiated contact. Something in Mike's chest tightened. He spent another night in the shed, his sleeping bag now familiar with the routine. The mare's breathing had steadied into a rhythm he'd learned to read. When it changed, he knew to check on her. When she grew restless, he knew to speak softly until she settled. His own rest came in patches, broken by the need to monitor her condition. Each time he woke, he found her, watching him with those intelligent eyes. There was trust there now, hard-won and precious. Dawn brought a new challenge, the bottom of the feed bag. Mike stared at the remaining handful of premium feed, then at the mare's expectant face. He'd have to make a feed store run, which meant spending money he didn't have. But looking at the progress they'd made, at the trust they'd built, he knew he couldn't stop now. Sometimes, his father had said, you make the right choice even when it's not the easy one. The private investigator's report landed in Katherine's inbox at 4:47 a.m. Possible sighting, farm property, coordinates attached. Local described hearing horse sounds from previously empty shed. Owner, Michael Thompson. Katherine scanned the background check that followed. Michael Thompson, 32, inherited farm from father, partial veterinary degree, no criminal record, currently in financial distress, multiple late notices, potential foreclosure. Reynolds, she called to her pilot through the helicopter's intercom. Change of course, sending new coordinates. The first light of dawn was breaking over the Kentucky hills as they approached the Thompson farm. From the air, Katherine could see the property's bones. Good land gone to seed, empty fields that once held promise. The infrastructure was aging, but solid. Someone had built this place to last. The helicopter's searchlight swept the ground, catching movement near a small shed. A man emerged, tall, working-class, sturdy, probably Thompson. He shielded his eyes against the light, his posture defensive but not hostile. There, Katherine pointed, that clearing by the main barn. Reynolds brought them down with practiced precision. The rotor wash sent leaves swirling across the yard, but Katherine was already unstrapping her seatbelt before they fully landed. Her Louboutin heels sank slightly into the damp earth as she stepped down. These shoes weren't made for farm work, but that had never stopped Katherine Windsor. Mike Thompson was waiting at the edge of the clearing, his stance wary. Up close, Katherine saw details the background check hadn't mentioned. Calloused hands that spoke of honest work, eyes that held equal parts fatigue and determination. He'd been up all night. She recognized the look. "Miss Windsor," he said. Not a question. Of course he'd figured it out. The horse's quality alone would have told him she belonged to someone with means. "Mr. Thompson." Katherine matched his directness. "I believe you have something of mine." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She's not a something, ma'am, and right now, she's resting." The correction surprised her. Most people faced with a billionaire's arrival would be stammering apologies or angling for rewards. Mike Thompson just stood his ground, more concerned with the horse's welfare than her owner's status. "Show me," Katherine said, softening her tone slightly. He led her to the shed, explaining his treatment decisions as they walked. His medical knowledge was obvious, even if his resources were limited. He'd done more with basic supplies than some professional vets might have managed. The shed door creaked open, and Katherine's breath caught. Starlight was standing, alert but calm. The wound was properly dressed, the infection clearly receding. But it was the mare's demeanor that struck Katherine most. There was no sign of the fear that had driven her to bolt days ago. "She trusts you," Katherine said quietly. Mike shrugged. "We came to an understanding. She needed help. I had some to give." "Some?" Katherine glanced at the empty feed bag, the depleted medical supplies. "You used everything you had. She needed it more than I did." The simplicity of his answer caught her off guard. In Katherine's world, every action came with calculation. Every decision weighted with ulterior motives. Mike Thompson had helped simply because help was needed. Starlight nickered softly, drawing Katherine's attention. The mare's eyes moved between them, as if sensing the tension in the air. Katherine approached slowly, running practiced hands over her horse's flanks, checking vitals with the expertise of long familiarity. "You did good work," she admitted, noting the professional quality of the bandaging. "Where did you learn emergency veterinary care?" 2 years at UC Davis before... He trailed off, but Katherine had read the file. Before family obligation called him home, before dreams of veterinary medicine gave way to the brutal reality of keeping a family farm alive. Their eyes met over Starlight's back, and something shifted in the air between them. Recognition, perhaps. 2 people who understood what it meant to shoulder responsibility, to put duty before desire. "She'll need professional follow-up care," Mike said, breaking the moment. "The wound's deeper than I could properly treat." Katherine nodded, already pulling out her phone. "I'll have my vet team here within the hour, along with your compensation, of course." Mike's expression closed slightly. "I didn't help her for money, Ms. Windsor." "Katherine," she corrected, surprising herself, "and I know you didn't. That's precisely why you deserve it." The sun was fully up now, painting the Kentucky morning in shades of gold. In the distance, Katherine's security team was arriving in black SUVs, bringing with them the weight of her world. But for a moment longer, she stood in comfortable silence with a farmer who had chosen compassion over convenience, watching the horse that had brought them together. Mike's kitchen felt smaller with Katherine Windsor in it. She sat at his worn table, looking surprisingly at ease, despite the contrast between her tailored suit and the humble surroundings. 2 mismatched coffee mugs sat between them. His daily one with its chip on the rim, and the world's best dad mug he usually kept in the cabinet. "Sorry about the coffee," he said, watching her take a careful sip. "Not exactly what you're used to. Actually, it's good." She took another sip. Strong, honest, a slight smile, like its maker. Outside, her medical team was tending to Starlight. The rhythms of his farm morning continued around them, roosters crowing, cattle lowing for their feed. Mike was acutely aware of tasks he should be doing, but something kept him here, watching one of the world's wealthiest women drink coffee from his father's mug. "Tell me about her," Katherine said suddenly. "These past few days, I want to know everything." So Mike told her, about finding Starlight in the rain, about the long nights monitoring her fever, about the trust slowly built through pain and patience. Katherine listened intently, asking occasional questions that revealed her deep knowledge of horses and healing. "The way she favored her left side," Katherine noted. "That's from an old injury. 3 years ago. I noticed that. Compensated for it in the bandaging." Mike hesitated. "She's had professional rehabilitation, extended therapy, probably hydrotherapy from the muscle development." Katherine's eyebrows rose slightly. "Your partial degree is showing, Mr. Thompson." "Mike," he corrected, surprising himself. "And you learned to read the signs, degree or not." A comfortable silence fell between them. Through the window, they could see Starlight receiving treatment, calm under the handler's care, but occasionally looking toward the house, checking for Mike. "She doesn't usually trust easily," Katherine said softly. "Not since the accident. But she'd trust you. Sometimes trust isn't about credentials. Sometimes it's just about being there, doing what needs doing." Katherine studied him over the rim of her mug. "Is that what keeps you here? Doing what needs doing?" The question hit closer to home than she could know. Mike's gaze drifted to the stack of bills on the counter, the bank notices he'd tried to hide when she arrived. "This land," he began, then stopped, unsure how to explain it to someone who bought and sold properties like trading cards. "It's not just acres and assets. It's legacy," Katherine finished. "History, purpose." He looked at her sharply. There was understanding in her eyes that he hadn't expected. "You think I built my company just for the profit?" She set down her mug. "Everything worthwhile has roots, Mike. Even digital empires." A commotion outside drew their attention. One of the vet techs was having trouble drawing blood from Starlight, the mare growing increasingly agitated. Without discussion, they both rose and headed out. Mike approached first, speaking softly to Starlight, while Katherine quietly instructed her team to give them space. Together, they calmed the horse, Mike's farm-work-strong hands gentle on her neck, while Katherine administered the injection with professional precision. "We make a good team," Katherine observed as they walked back to the house. "Different skills, same goal." Mike chuckled. "Pretty sure our worlds don't overlap much beyond this moment, don't they?" She paused at the kitchen door. "You're a caretaker, Mike. Of animals, of land, of heritage. I protect things too. Businesses, innovations, opportunities. We just work different fields." The morning sun caught her face, and for a moment Mike saw past the power suit and reputation. He saw someone who understood dedication, who knew the weight of responsibility, someone who, despite all her wealth, chose to fly through a storm, to find a wounded horse. "More coffee?" he offered. "Please." She settled back at the table. "And maybe you can tell me more about your time at Davis. What made you choose veterinary medicine?" It should have felt like an invasion of privacy. She'd obviously read his background, but something in her tone made it a genuine question, an interest in the person rather than the file. As Mike poured the coffee, he found himself wanting to answer, wanting to explain about the injured hawk he'd rehabilitated at 12, about the summer helping at Dr. Hansen's clinic, about dreams deferred but not forgotten. The morning stretched on, two people from different worlds finding unexpected common ground over cheap coffee in mismatched mugs. Katherine stood at the edge of Mike's eastern field, her heels traded for borrowed boots, holding a weathered deed in her manicured hands. To Mike's surprise, she read it carefully, showing genuine interest in the property's history and boundaries. 112 acres, she noted. Original parcel from 1932, plus the Anderson addition in 56. She looked up. "Your great-grandfather had vision." "He had grit," Mike corrected. "Vision came later with better times." They walked the property line together, an odd pair in the Kentucky morning. Katherine asked questions that revealed both business acumen and agricultural knowledge. Soil composition, water rights, crop rotation patterns. Mike found himself sharing more than he intended about his hopes for the land, plans he'd had to shelve as resources dwindled. "The irrigation system needs updating," he explained, pointing to the jury-rigged setup. "And the North Field's been fallow too long. With proper investment, it could be exceptional." Katherine completed his thought. She paused, looking across the rolling landscape. "What would you say to a partnership?" Mike's step faltered. "I'm not looking to sell. Neither am I looking to buy." She turned to face him. "I'm proposing something different. A joint venture. Your land, your expertise, my resources." From her briefcase, she pulled out a folder, clearly prepared in advance. Of course, she'd done her research before flying out. Katherine Windsor didn't leave things to chance. "I've been looking to expand my equine rehabilitation program," she explained. "Starlight was just the beginning. There's a growing need for specialized care facilities, particularly for retired racehorses." Mike took the folder, scanning preliminary plans that made his breath catch. State-of-the-art facilities integrated with traditional farm operations. Hydrotherapy pools, training tracks, restored pastures. His grandfather's vision made real with modern innovation. "The existing farm operations would continue," Katherine added, watching his reaction. "Enhanced, not replaced. We'd need that authenticity, that connection to the land. And we'd need you, Mike. Your skills, your approach to care, that's what." Starlight responded to. The numbers in the proposal made his head spin. The investment would clear his debts 5 times over. But it was the operational structure that gave him pause. He'd maintain majority ownership, full operational control of the traditional farming side. Katherine's company would handle the rehabilitation facility, with Mike as lead veterinary consultant. Once he completed his degree. "You've thought this through," he said quietly. "I think through everything." She smiled slightly. "It's how I built my company. I spot potential others miss, and I believe in investing in what works." A breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut hay from his neighbor's field. Somewhere in the distance, a tractor engine rumbled to life. The familiar sounds of his world continued, while everything shifted beneath his feet. "Why?" he asked finally. "You could build this anywhere. Buy better land, newer facilities." "Because money can't buy what you have here," Katherine gestured to the farm around them. "This place has soul, Mike. It has history. Horses respond to that. Starlight showed us that." As if on cue, they heard a familiar whinny. Starlight was watching them from her temporary paddock, her bearing stronger after professional treatment, but still turning to Mike for reassurance. "There's something else," Katherine continued, "something I haven't put in the proposal." She hesitated, showing the first uncertainty he'd seen from her. "I'd like to base the program here personally, build a small residence on the property, be hands-on with the rehabilitation work." Mike studied her face, seeing past the business facade to something more vulnerable. "You need this too, don't you? Not just the business side." She met his gaze steadily. "Let's say I understand the value of rehabilitation, of having space to heal." The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the dew. Mike thought about his father, about promises made and dreams deferred. The weight of legacy pressed against him, but differently now, not just a burden to bear, but a foundation to build upon. "I'll need time," he said, "to think it through, to make sure it's right." Katherine nodded, respect in her eyes. "Take the time you need. But remember, sometimes the right choice feels like the scariest one." She smiled. "I almost didn't buy Starlight. Almost let fear of complications stop me from something extraordinary." They walked back toward the house, the proposal heavy in Mike's hands. The farm looked different now, filled with possibility rather than just obligation. But change, even positive change, carried its own kind of terror. "One condition," he said as they reached the porch. "If we do this, when we do this, we start with Starlight. She stays here, completes her rehabilitation where she started it." Katherine's smile widened. "I think she's already made that choice for us." Mike found the old photo album in the back of his father's desk drawer, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. As he spread it across the kitchen table, Katherine leaned in, her shoulder brushing his as they studied images of the farm in its prime. "That's Dad with our first prize bull," Mike explained, pointing to a faded photograph. 1985, the year everything changed. Started modernizing, expanding the dairy operation. "He looks proud," Katherine observed. "Like you when you work with the animals." It had been a week since her proposal, and she'd visited daily, ostensibly to check on Starlight. But their conversations had wandered far beyond business, each learning the shape of the other's world. "Here's the barn raising," Mike continued, turning a page. "Whole community turned out. That's how things were done back then. Still could be," Katherine said softly. "Different time, same principle. People coming together to build something meaningful." A sudden commotion outside interrupted them. Through the window, they saw Starlight rearing in her paddock, spooked by a delivery truck backfiring on the main road. Before the handlers could react, Mike was moving. Katherine watched him calm the mare with practiced ease. His movements sure and gentle. In just a week, he'd learned all of Starlight's quirks, her triggers, her signals. The horse settled under his touch, while Katherine's highly trained staff stood back, taking mental notes. When Mike returned to the kitchen, Katherine was studying a more recent photo, his father's last harvest, just 2 years ago. "The farm was already struggling then," Mike said, sitting back down. "Dad knew, but he never let on. Just kept working, kept believing things would turn around." "And now," Katherine asked, "what would he think of our plans?" Mike was silent for a moment, considering. The preliminary paperwork for their partnership lay on the counter, still unsigned. The possibilities it offered were tantalizing. A chance to save the farm, finish his degree, build something new while preserving the old. "He always said farming had to evolve," Mike answered finally. "But he was careful about change, wanted to make sure it served the land, not just the ledger." Katherine nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That's why the proposal maintains traditional operations alongside the rehabilitation facility. both, sides supporting each other, like any good ecosystem. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah from the bank stood on the porch, her expression shifting from professional to surprised when she saw Katherine. "Mr. Thompson, she faltered. "I didn't realize you had company." "Sarah, come in." Mike made introductions, watching. The banker tried to reconcile the presence of a Fortune 500 CEO in his farmhouse kitchen. "I just stopped by about the payment schedule," Sarah said, clearly uncomfortable. "But I can come back." "No need." Katherine's voice was warm, but carried natural authority. "Mike and I were just discussing some business opportunities. Perhaps you'd like to join us." Over the next hour, Katherine outlined the partnership proposal. Sarah's initial skepticism gave way to cautious optimism as she reviewed the numbers. But Mike noticed something else in the banker's manner, a hint of calculation, of seeing the farm with new eyes. After Sarah left, Katherine turned to Mike. "She'll have calls from developers by tomorrow. Once word gets out about the rehabilitation center, land prices in the area will rise. My neighbors," Mike realized, "they'll face pressure to sell." "Progress has a price," Katherine acknowledged, "but it also has possibilities. Your father adapted to changing times. Maybe we can help others do the same." She moved to the window, watching starlight graze peacefully in the afternoon sun. The mare's wound was healing well, her strength returning. But she showed no interest in leaving the farm, even when the handlers tried to coax her toward the transport trailer. "She knows she's home," Katherine said quietly. "Sometimes the heart recognizes what the mind is still figuring out." Mike joined her at the window, their reflections overlapping in the glass. A week ago, they'd been strangers from different worlds. Now they were planning a future neither had imagined. "If we do this," he said, "we do it right. Not just for us or the farm, but for the whole community." Katherine's smile held understanding and something more. "Together," she agreed. "Both worlds, making something better than either could alone." Outside, the Kentucky sun painted long shadows across fields that had seen generations of change and persistence. Inside, two people stood at the edge of their own transformation, each sensing that saving a horse had somehow led to saving much more. The business proposal sat open on Mike's truck dashboard as he pulled into the local diner. Through the window, he could see a cluster of familiar faces, other farmers gathering for their usual morning coffee. But today, their attention fixed on him as he walked in, conversations dropping to whispers. Old Joe Henderson broke the silence first. "So, Mike, here you're going corporate on us." Mike poured himself coffee, taking his usual seat at the counter. "Not exactly, Joe. It's a partnership, not a takeover." "Partnership with Katherine Windsor," Bob Wilson chimed in. "Same woman who's been buying up farms in Virginia, turning them into fancy horse camps. Read about it online." "Rehabilitation centers," Mike corrected. "And this is different. We're keeping the traditional farming operations, just adding city money and city problems," Joe cut in. "Your daddy would have thought twice about this, son." The words stung, but before Mike could respond, the diner's door chimed. Katherine walked in, trading her usual business attire for jeans and a simple blouse. The locals' reaction was immediate. Back straightening, conversations hushing. "Morning, everyone," she said easily, sliding onto the stool next to Mike. "Hope there's enough coffee to share." Betty, the owner's wife, recovered first. "Of course, Ms. Windsor. How do you take it?" "Black is fine. And it's Katherine." She turned to the room. "I imagine you all have questions about the rehabilitation center." The tension crackled. Then Bob Wilson leaned forward. "My grandson's studying veterinary medicine at UK. Says these fancy rehab facilities are the future of equine care." "They are," Katherine agreed. "But they work best when combined with traditional farming wisdom. That's why this location is perfect. Generations of horse knowledge in this community." Mike watched her work the room, answering questions with respect and genuine interest. She asked about local farming challenges, listened to concerns about development pressure. When Joe mentioned his daughter's dream of becoming a horse trainer, Katherine offered to have her intern at the facility. Gradually, the atmosphere shifted. The farmer's defensive posture softened as Katherine demonstrated real understanding of agricultural issues. She wasn't just a city investor throwing money around. She knew crop rotation patterns, understood livestock management, respected the rhythms of farm life. "Show them the full plans," Mike suggested quietly. Katherine pulled out her tablet, displaying the architectural renderings. The rehabilitation center blended seamlessly with the existing farm structures, respecting the local aesthetic while incorporating modern technology. "We'll need local expertise," she explained. "Feed, suppliers, equipment maintenance, seasonal workers. This isn't about replacing what's here, it's about enhancing it." Bob studied the plans. "Those barns, they're designed like the old German bank barns from the 1900s. "Yes," Katherine smiled. "Mike showed me his grandfather's original barn. We're adapting that design for the new facilities, proven methods updated for modern needs." The conversation evolved into a detailed discussion of farming practices and horse care. Mike watched in amazement as Katherine held her own, her corporate polish giving way to genuine enthusiasm for agriculture. Later, as they walked back to their vehicles, Katherine paused. "That was important, wasn't it? Getting their support?" Mike nodded. "They're not just neighbors. They're the community's memory. If they accept the change, others will follow." "Memory matters," Katherine agreed. "Like that barn design, sometimes the old ways are the best foundation for new ideas." A truck pulled up, and Sarah from the bank stepped out. Her expression was troubled. "Mike, Katherine, we need to talk. Developers are making offers. All over the county. Someone leaked news about the rehabilitation center. Land prices are already rising." Katherine's face tightened. "Faster than we expected. Have any of your neighbors sold?" "Not yet," Mike said. "But the pressure's building. The Andersons are struggling with medical bills. The Wilsons have college tuition coming up." "Then we adapt," Katherine decided. "Sarah, can you arrange a community meeting? We need to get ahead of this." As Sarah made calls, Mike and Katherine stood in the diner's parking lot, watching farmers leave for their morning chores. Each truck that pulled away carried not just a neighbor, but a piece of the community's future. "We're changing their world," Mike said softly. Katherine touched his arm gently. "No, we're helping their world evolve. There's a difference." But as they watched another developer's luxury car cruise slowly past the surrounding farms, both felt the weight of responsibility growing. They weren't just building a business anymore. They were trying to preserve a way of life while guiding it into a new era. The local newspaper headline caught Mike off guard. "Tech billionaire and Kentucky farmer, an unlikely partnership transforms rural community." The photo showed him and Katherine by the fence line, her hand resting casually on his arm as they looked out over the fields. He hadn't even noticed the photographer that day. "Your phone's been ringing," his mother said, setting down her coffee. She'd driven up from Florida as soon as the story broke, concern and curiosity warring in her expression. "Journalists," Mike replied, pushing away the paper. "Looking for human interest angles. Rich city woman, poor country farmer. That kind of thing. Is that what this is?" His mother's voice was careful. "Just an interesting story?" Before Mike could answer, a familiar helicopter sound approached. His mother watched him straighten automatically, attention shifting to the window. "She visits every day?" The question carried weight. "We're building something important here, Mom." Katherine's arrival brought her usual whirlwind of energy, but today it was tinged with tension. She carried a stack of newspapers, and her tablet displayed multiple news sites. "We're trending," she said without preamble. Social media's picked up the story. "My PR team is getting calls from major networks." Mike made introductions, watching his mother evaluate Katherine with a parent's protective instinct. Katherine, for her part, showed none of her corporate polish, instead revealing the warmth she usually reserved for their private conversations. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, "I've wanted to thank you. The photo album you left for Mike. It helped us design the rehabilitation center to honor the farm's heritage." His mother softened slightly, but before she could respond, Mike's phone buzzed. Another text from Sarah. Channel 5 news van heading your way. Developers called emergency town council meeting for tonight. Katherine read the message over his shoulder, her shoulder brushing his. His mother noticed the casual intimacy, her eyebrows rising slightly. We need to get ahead of this, Katherine said. The developers will try to paint us as outsiders forcing change. We need the community's story out first. Mike, his mother interjected, could I borrow Katherine for a moment? Maybe show her those old files in the study? The two women disappeared into the house, leaving Mike to watch another news van turn onto his road. Through the study window, he could see his mother talking intently, Katherine listening with uncharacteristic deference. When they returned, something had shifted. His mother's stance was more relaxed, and Katherine's eyes held a new determination. The developers don't understand this place, Katherine said. They see dollars and demographics. They don't see 4 generations of community, of families helping families. Show them, his mother said suddenly. Both turned to her. When the floods came in '97, everyone kept records. Photos, letters, loan agreements between neighbors. Show them what this community really is. Katherine's eyes lit up. Mrs. Thompson, you're brilliant. Mike, where are those records? The next few hours became a flurry of activity. As reporters gathered outside, they assembled a documentation of community resilience. Katherine's corporate expertise merged with local knowledge, crafting a narrative that went beyond simple business. But it was during a quiet moment, sorting through old photographs, that the real tension surfaced. The London investors called again, Katherine said softly. They're offering triple the initial estimate. For all of it. The farm, the rehabilitation program, everything. Mike's hands stilled on the photos. You're considering it? My board is. They say it's better business. Faster returns, less, she hesitated, emotional complexity. The unspoken weight hung between them. The press coverage hadn't missed. Their growing closeness, the lingering looks, the easy physical comfort they'd developed. Speculation was rampant about whether their partnership was more than professional. And what do you say? Mike forced himself to meet her eyes. I say, some things are worth more than fast returns. Her voice was quiet but firm. But Mike, we need to be clear about what we're really building here. All of it. His mother chose that moment to return, carrying fresh coffee. The tension in the room was palpable. You know, she said conversationally, your father used to say you can't grow anything worthwhile if you're afraid to get your hands dirty. She set down the cups. He meant more than just farming. Outside, the media circus grew. Another news van arrived, and Mike could see Joe Henderson and other farmers gathering at the property edge, forming a protective barrier against intrusive reporters. The community was choosing sides, but not in the way the developers had expected. They were choosing the future that Mike and Katherine represented, one that honored the past while embracing change. We should get out there, Katherine said finally. Face it together. The word together carried new weight now, acknowledged but not yet defined. As they stood, Mike's mother touched Katherine's arm. Just remember, she said softly, around here, we don't just invest in land, we invest in people. Katherine's eyes met Mike's, and in them he saw the same mix of fear and hope he felt, the terrifying possibility of losing something before it was fully found. The hidden will appeared where Mike least expected it, tucked inside his father's old ledger, the one he'd been avoiding since the funeral. He found it while searching for documentation for the partnership agreement, its yellowed envelope, marked simply, for when the time comes. His hands trembled as he read the contents. Then he read them again, understanding finally why his father had made that strange request on his deathbed. The Anderson land. Promise me you'll keep an eye on it. The phone rang, Katherine's name lighting up the screen. He let it go to voicemail. Outside his window, construction equipment was already arriving for the rehabilitation center's groundbreaking. The future he and Katherine had planned was taking shape. But the past, it seemed, wasn't finished with him yet. "Mike!" His mother's voice carried concern. She stood in the doorway, reading his expression. "You found it. You knew?" "Not everything. Just that your father was worried about something to do with the Anderson purchase. He never told me the details." Mike spread the documents across the kitchen table. His father's original deed, loan papers, and a second set of documents he'd never seen before. The story they told changed everything. "The Anderson land was never fully ours," he said quietly. "Dad used it as collateral for a loan to help James Anderson save his dairy farm back in '95. If the loan was ever called in, the developers." His mother sank into a chair. "They've been asking about property lines. They must have found out." The sound of helicopter blades cut through their conversation. Katherine was early for the groundbreaking ceremony. Mike gathered the papers with shaking hands. "I have to tell her. The rehabilitation center, half of it would be built on land we might not own." Katherine found them in the kitchen, her smile fading as she read the atmosphere. Without a word, Mike handed her the documents. She read them with her usual efficiency, her business mask sliding into place. "This changes the timeline," she said finally, "but not necessarily the outcome. How much is the loan?" "More than the farm is worth," Mike admitted. "Dad helped refinance it multiple times, with interest." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah from the bank stood there, but not alone. Behind her was James Anderson, Jr., looking uncomfortable in a suit that screamed, "Corporate lawyer." "I'm sorry, Mike," Sarah said, "but with the groundbreaking today, they're calling in the loan." James Jr. couldn't meet Mike's eyes. Dad never wanted this, but when he passed last month, the estate lawyers found the paperwork. Katherine's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression tightening. "My board just got wind of this. They're calling an emergency meeting." The kitchen became a flurry of activity. Sarah explaining legal terms, James Jr. presenting demands, Katherine on multiple calls with her lawyers. Through it all, Mike stood silent, watching his world unravel. "There's more," his mother said suddenly. Everyone turned to her. She pulled another document from the ledger, a letter in his father's handwriting. Mike read it aloud. "Son, if you're reading this, the Anderson loan has come due. But remember what I taught you. Every problem has a history, and every history has a solution. Check the back acre by the old oak. I left something there for when this day came." Katherine was already moving. "Show me." They took Mike's truck, bouncing across the familiar fields that suddenly felt like strangers. Land. The old oak stood sentinel over generations of Thompson family picnics and celebrations. At its base, weather-worn but intact, stood a metal box. Inside, they found more documents, and a story that changed everything again. "Your father," Katherine breathed, reading quickly. "He was protecting more than just the Anderson farm. This whole area, it's sitting on limestone caverns, prime mineral rights." The developers knew, Mike realized. That's why they've been so aggressive. They don't want the surface rights. They want what's underneath. Katherine's business instincts kicked in. The mineral rights are separate from the land deed. If your father secured those, more papers emerged. Agreements, surveys, mineral rights transfers. A complex web of legal protection his father had quietly woven, ensuring that no matter who owned the surface, the caverns could never be exploited. "He made the loan to protect the water table," Mike said, understanding finally. "The caverns feed every spring in the county. If they were mined, every farm would be at risk." Katherine was already dialing. "This changes our whole strategy. Mike, the rehabilitation center isn't just about horses anymore. It's about protecting an ecosystem." They rushed back to the house, where the various parties waited in tense silence. Katherine took control of the room, her CEO authority in full force. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're restructuring this entire agreement. The Thompson-Windsor partnership isn't just building a rehabilitation center, we're establishing a conservation trust." Over the next hour, she laid out a vision that left everyone stunned. The rehabilitation center would become part of a larger environmental preserve. The mineral rights would be permanently protected. Local farmers would be offered partnerships rather than buyouts. The developers can't fight this, she explained. The PR nightmare alone would sink them. And my board? She smiled. They've been pushing for more green initiatives. This is perfect. But in the midst of the negotiations, Mike noticed something else in his father's letter. A personal note meant only for him. Son, I knew someday you'd find someone who shares your love for this land. Someone who sees its value beyond dollars and cents. When you do, don't let pride or fear stand in your way. Some partnerships are about more than business. He looked up to find Katherine watching him, her professional mask slipping just enough to show her real concern. You knew, he said later when the others had gone. When I showed you the first documents, you already suspected something like this. She nodded. Land disputes usually have deeper roots, but I needed you to find the truth yourself. She stepped closer. Mike, whatever happens with the business, whatever we uncover about the land, that's not why I'm here every day. The weight of unspoken feelings hung between them, heavier than any property deed. His mother cleared her throat from the doorway. Your father also said something else that last day. He said, tell Mike that sometimes the best crop a farmer can grow is trust. Outside, the construction equipment waited. The future was still uncertain, but differently now. Not a question of losing the past, but of building something new while protecting what mattered most. Partners? Katherine asked softly, extending her hand. Mike took it, knowing they were negotiating far more than business now. Partners. The groundbreaking ceremony would have to be delayed, the plans modified, the agreements rewritten. But as they stood in his kitchen, hands clasped, Mike realized that his father had given him one final gift. The understanding that love of the land and love of a person could grow from the same soil. The corporate takeover notice arrived by courier at dawn. Granite Holdings International intends to acquire controlling interest in Windsor Enterprises through a hostile takeover bid. Katherine stood in Mike's kitchen, reading it for the third time, her usual composure cracking. They're using this delay to make their move, she said. The board is already nervous about the conservation plan. If Granite convinces enough shareholders that I'm putting personal interests ahead of profits. Mike studied the woman who'd become so much more than a business partner. The early morning light caught the shadows under her eyes, evidence of sleepless nights spent fighting for their shared vision. How long do we have? The shareholder vote is in 3 days. She set down the notice. We need to prove the Conservation Trust isn't just good ethics, it's good business. Outside, Starlight nickered from her paddock. The mare's rehabilitation had become a symbol of their larger mission. Local farmers stopped by daily to watch her progress, bringing their children to learn about horse care and conservation. Show me the numbers again, Mike said, pulling out the trust proposal. They spread the documents across the kitchen table, where so many of their plans had taken shape. Katherine's financial projections showed the long-term benefits of protecting the limestone caverns. Stable water tables meant sustainable farming, which meant consistent agricultural revenues. The problem is, these are 20-year projections, Katherine explained. Granite is promising 15% returns next quarter through aggressive mineral extraction. A truck pulled up outside, Joe Henderson and several other farmers. They'd been meeting every morning since the conservation plan was announced, organizing local support. Found something you need to see, Joe said without preamble. He unfolded a yellowed newspaper from 1947. My grandfather saved this. It's about the last time someone tried to mine these caverns. The article detailed an environmental disaster 1 county over. Collapsed sinkholes, poisoned wells, farms abandoned. But more importantly, it showed property values plummeting across the entire region. This is what we need, Katherine said, energy returning to her voice. Historical proof that short-term mineral profits lead to long-term economic damage. Mike watched her work, fingers flying over her tablet as she updated their presentation. She'd fought her way to the top of the tech world, but here in his kitchen, she was fighting for something more personal. His mother appeared with coffee and fresh muffins. The kitchen had become an informal headquarters, mixing corporate strategy with country hospitality. As more neighbors arrived, the discussion evolved from business defense to community activism. "The Wilsons are organizing a town hall meeting," Bob reported. "Every farmer in 3 counties wants to speak about water rights. My daughter's environmental science class is doing a presentation on limestone ecology," Joe added. "The whole high school's getting involved." Catherine's phone buzzed, her PR team with updates. The media had caught wind of the takeover, a bid, but also of the community's response. National environmental groups were pledging support. "Granite's stock dropped 2 points on the news," she reported. "They didn't expect this level of opposition." Mike touched her shoulder gently. "They didn't expect you." Their eyes met, holding a conversation without words. The past weeks had changed them both. The CEO learning to value more than profit margins, the farmer realizing his land could inspire more than local change. Sarah arrived from the bank, carrying new projections. Local business leaders are backing the Conservation Trust. They're seeing the long-term benefits to tourism, agriculture and land values. But amid the growing support, a new threat emerged. Catherine's board chairman called, his message clear. Either she withdrew the conservation plan and focused on practical business matters, or they would support Granite's takeover bid. "They're giving me until midnight to decide," she said. After the call, her voice tight. "Walk with me." They headed to the east pasture, where the morning sun painted everything in shades of possibility. Starlight followed along her fence line, her gait strong and sure, living proof that healing was possible with enough time and care. "I could lose everything," Katherine said quietly. "The company I built, my reputation in the business world. Or we could lose everything," Mike corrected gently. "The water table, the farmland, the community's future." She turned to him, searching his face. "When did you become so sure about all this?" "When you showed me how to see the bigger picture," he smiled. "Or maybe when a billionaire spent 3 days helping me muck out horse stalls." The memory drew, a laugh from her, tension easing slightly. Below them, the morning mist revealed the subtle signs of the caverns they were fighting to protect, dips and rises in the land that held both danger and promise. "So," Mike said, "what's our next move, partner?" Katherine sat cross-legged on the barn floor, surrounded by Starlight's medical records. The mare's rehabilitation journey, documented in meticulous detail, told a story beyond just veterinary care. Each progress note, each milestone reached, proved that patience could triumph over profit. "Found it," she said, as Mike entered with coffee. "Look at these recovery rates compared to industry standards." Mike knelt beside her, their shoulders touching as they reviewed the data. Starlight's progress under their combined care, his practical experience and her resources, showed remarkable results. "It's not just faster healing," he noted. "The overall outcomes are better. Less reliance on medications, more natural. Rebuilding of strength, because we gave her time," Katherine said softly. "We didn't rush for quick returns." The parallel to their current situation hung unspoken between them. With less than 48 hours until the shareholder vote, pressure was mounting to abandon their deliberate approach. A commotion outside drew their attention. Dr. Chen, Catherine's head veterinarian, was arriving with a team of researchers from the state university. The scientific validation they needed was finally happening. "Mrs. Thompson's been showing them around," Dr. Chen reported. "The combination of traditional farming practices and modern rehabilitation techniques. They're calling it revolutionary." Catherine's eyes lit up with familiar determination. "Get me their preliminary findings. The shareholders need to see this isn't just about one farm or one horse." As the research team conducted their studies, more visitors arrived. News crews captured footage of Starlight working with local children in her therapy sessions. Environmental Scientists documented the unique ecosystem of the limestone caverns. Agricultural experts praised the sustainable farming methods. But it was the arrival of Thomas Burke, Katherine's former mentor and a legendary figure in corporate finance, that changed the game. "You've built something remarkable here," he told Katherine, watching Starlight demonstrate her recovery with perfect form. "Something that can't be measured in quarterly reports." "The board doesn't see it that way," she replied. "They want immediate returns." "The board," Thomas said with a knowing smile, "needs to learn the difference between price and value. Show me everything." As they walked the property, Mike watched Katherine transform complex agricultural concepts into compelling business opportunities. She wasn't just defending their plan, she was revealing a new vision for corporate responsibility. Sustainable agriculture, equine therapy, environmental conservation, Thomas mused. Package it right, and you'll have every socially conscious investment fund clamoring for shares. More than that, Mike added, surprising himself by joining the conversation. You'll have a model other communities can follow? Thomas studied him thoughtfully. "You know, Katherine said you were more than just a farmer. Now I see what she meant." The comment drew a blush to Katherine's cheeks, a rare sight that made Mike's heart skip. But before he could respond, his mother called them to the house. The kitchen had become a war room. Local farmers shared generations of knowledge about the cavern systems. University researchers overlaid this with geological surveys. Katherine's team translated it all into business projections. "Look at these soil samples," Dr. Chen pointed out. "The mineral-rich water from the protected caverns. It's what makes this land so fertile." "Which means," Katherine continued, excitement building, "if we protect the water table, we're not just saving farms, we're preserving some of the most productive agricultural land in the state." Thomas Burke nodded slowly. "Environmental protection, leading to sustained profits. Hard to argue with that." As evening fell, the kitchen slowly emptied. Thomas left with a portfolio of data and a promise to make calls. The researchers departed with samples and enthusiasm. Even Katherine's PR team packed up, armed with compelling narratives for the morning news. Finally, it was just Mike and Katherine, standing in the quiet kitchen where their partnership had first taken root. "What if it's not enough?" she whispered, vulnerability showing through her confident facade. "What if the shareholders can't see beyond the next quarter's profits?" Mike reached for her hand, feeling the strength in her fingers as they intertwined with his. "Then we'll find another way. Together." She turned to him, moonlight from the window silvering her hair. "When did you become my strength?" "Probably around the same time you became mine." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken feelings and growing certainty. Outside, Starlight's soft nickering floated on the night air, a reminder of where their journey had begun. "Whatever happens at the vote," Katherine said, her voice steadying, "this is worth fighting for. All of it." Mike squeezed her hand gently, understanding she meant more than just the business plan. Sometimes the most valuable things couldn't be measured in dollars or documented in reports. Sometimes they could only be felt, growing steady and strong, like love for the land, or for each other. The partnership agreement sat ready for signing on Mike's kitchen table, while across the country in New York, Windsor Enterprises shareholders gathered for the vote. Katherine paced the worn linoleum, her laptop open to a live feed of the proceedings. "Granite Holdings presents a compelling case for immediate profit," the board chairman was saying. "Ms. Windsor's conservation plan, while admirable, represents significant risk." Mike watched Katherine's face tighten. They'd spent the night preparing her remote presentation, but now everything hinged on Thomas Burke's ability to sway the major shareholders before her turn to speak. The kitchen was packed. Local farmers stood shoulder to shoulder with Katherine's executive team, all eyes fixed on the screen. Dr. Chen had her research data ready. Environmental scientists waited with their impact studies. Even Sarah from the bank was there, holding updated financial projections. "And now," the chairman announced, "we'll hear from Ms. Windsor herself." Katherine squared her shoulders, facing the camera they'd set up. But before she could begin, Thomas Burke's voice cut through the feed. "If I may, Chairman, I'd like to present some additional data first." The room held its breath. Thomas had spent the past day calling in favors, reaching out to his extensive network of corporate investors. Now he stood before the shareholders, his reputation adding weight to every word. "I've personally visited the Thompson Windsor project," he began. "What I found wasn't just a conservation plan. It's a blueprint for sustainable profit." He launched into the numbers. Projected revenue from the rehabilitation center, increased land values from protected water tables, agricultural yields from mineral-rich soil. But more than that, he painted a picture of corporate responsibility that resonated with younger shareholders. "In an age where consumers demand environmental accountability," he concluded, "Katherine Windsor isn't just protecting land, she's protecting Windsor Enterprises' future." Katherine's presentation followed, but now she spoke not from prepared notes, but from the heart. The laptop camera captured not just her, but the community behind her, farmers, scientists, business leaders, all united by a shared vision. "Look around this room," she said. "This is what sustainable business looks like. Not quarterly profits at the expense of tomorrow, but partnerships that build lasting value." She nodded to Mike, who led their final demonstration. The camera followed him to the paddock where Starlight waited. The mare's rehabilitation had become a symbol of their larger mission, proof that healing was possible when profit didn't override patience. Dr. Chen presented the recovery statistics. Local farmers testified about water quality and crop yields. Environmental scientists explained the unique value of the limestone ecosystem. But it was the children's therapy program, showing Starlight working gently with disabled youth, that brought tears to shareholders' eyes. "This isn't just about saving one farm or one horse," Katherine concluded. "It's about showing that business can be a force for positive change. The choice isn't between profit and protection. It's between short-term gains and lasting legacy." The voting began. Minutes stretched like hours as shareholders made their decisions. Katherine stood perfectly still, her hand finding Mike's as they waited. Finally, the chairman spoke. "The results are clear. With 67% in favor, the shareholders have rejected Granite's takeover bid and endorsed Ms. Windsor's conservation plan." The kitchen erupted in cheers. Farmers clapped each other on the back. Katherine's executives hugged environmental scientists. Sarah was already on the phone, spreading the news to other community banks. But in the midst of celebration, Mike noticed Katherine slip outside. He found her by Starlight's paddock, tears streaming down her face. "Hey," he said softly, "you did it." She turned to him, moonlight catching the tears on her cheeks. "We did it, all of us. I never understood before. Real strength isn't in standing alone, it's in standing together." Mike stepped closer, drawn by the vulnerability in her voice. "So what happens now?" "Now," she smiled through her tears, "now we build something that will last. The rehabilitation center, everything." Her hand found his again. "The center, the conservation trust, the community partnerships." She paused, gathering courage. "Us." The word hung between them, full of promise and possibility. Before Mike could respond, a familiar nicker made them turn. Starlight had approached the fence, her elegant head extending toward them. "She knows," Mike said softly. "Animals always know when something's healing." Katherine leaned against him, her corporate armor finally falling. Away completely. Behind them, the sounds of celebration drifted from the kitchen. Before them stretched fields that would now be protected for generations. And between them grew something that no shareholder vote could measure, a partnership of hearts as well as hands. "Sign the papers with me," Katherine asked quietly. Mike smiled, understanding she meant more than just the business agreement. "Partner," he replied, the word carrying all his answer. Together, they walked back to the kitchen where a community waited to help them build their shared dream. Grand opening. the banner proclaimed, stretching across the newly renovated barn. The rehabilitation center's design had exceeded even their hopes. Modern technology seamlessly integrated with traditional architecture, the old Thompson barn's heritage preserved in every beam and board. Mike stood at the podium, looking out over the gathered crowd. Local farmers sat beside corporate investors, environmental activists next to agricultural scientists. His mother beamed from the front row, seated between Katherine's board chairman and old Joe Henderson. "My father used to say that good land tells its own story," Mike began. "Today, we're adding a new chapter to that story. Not just for this farm, but for every farm that believes in balancing progress with preservation." Katherine joined him at the podium, their shoulders touching naturally. Gone was the power suit of her CEO days, replaced by elegant country wear that suited her newfound peace. The past 3 months had transformed them both. "When I first landed here looking for a lost horse," she added, "I thought I was just protecting an investment. Instead, I found an investment in the future, in sustainable agriculture, in community healing, in proving that doing good can be good business." They unveiled the center's cornerstone, Thompson Windsor Rehabilitation and Conservation Trust, where healing meets heritage. The plaque bore 2 symbolic images, a horse in full stride and a farmer's hand cupping rich soil. Starlight led the first demonstration, showing off the new hydrotherapy pool. Her recovery had become their proof of concept, drawing attention from veterinary schools nationwide. Behind her came other success stories, retired racehorses, injured show jumpers, each representing hope restored. "The water monitoring stations are already showing improvement," Dr. Chen reported during the technical presentation. "The protected caverns are naturally filtering agricultural runoff, creating a sustainable cycle." Local children proudly showed visitors their new 4-H projects, housed in a special youth section of the facility. The Thompson Windsor Scholarship Program would send 2 of them to veterinary school next fall. "Remember when you thought this was just about horses?" Mike's mother teased Katherine during the reception. Katherine smiled, watching farmers discuss soil conservation with her former board members. "I thought a lot of things back then. I thought business success meant standing alone. I thought power came from control rather than collaboration." "And now?" his mother prompted gently. Katherine's eyes found Mike across the room, where he was showing Thomas Burke the innovative drainage system they'd designed. "Now I know that the best investments are the ones that grow in your heart." The celebration continued into evening, fairy lights twinkling in the old oak trees. Music drifted from the barn, where locals had organized a dance. Mike found Katherine by Starlight's paddock, lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts, partner," he asked softly. She turned, moonlight silvering her hair. "I was thinking about that first morning, when I landed here ready to take charge and solve everything with money. You've come a long way from the CEO who wore Louboutins to a barn. We both have." She gestured to the thriving facility around them. "Look what we built together." Mike stepped closer, taking her hand. "I wasn't talking about the center." The music changed to a slow country waltz. Without discussion, they began to dance, there in the paddock under the stars. Starlight watched them with wise eyes. The mare who had brought them together now witnessed to where that meeting had led. "The London Investment Group called again," Katherine murmured against his shoulder, "still trying to buy us out. I told them some things aren't for sale." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "The trust is working, Mike. 3 more farms joined. The conservation program today. The community bank is offering special loans for sustainable agriculture. We're actually doing it. Was there ever any doubt? Only about how long it would take me to do this." Standing on tiptoe, she kissed him there under the Kentucky stars. The kiss was witnessed by fireflies and approved by a soft nicker from Starlight. When they parted, both were smiling at the rightness of it all. "So," Mike said, "ready to build something even bigger." Katherine's eyes sparkled. "The rehabilitation program, the conservation trust, a life," he corrected softly. Together. Inside the barn, their guests danced and celebrated. Outside, the protected land stretched dark and fertile under the stars. And there in the paddock, a billionaire and a farmer swayed to country music, proving that the greatest partnerships grow from the heart as much as the land. Together, Katherine agreed, fitting perfectly in his arms. I like the sound of that. Above them, a shooting star traced its path across the Kentucky sky, blessing a love story that had begun with a wounded horse and grown into something that would nurture generations to come. A year later, the old horseshoe from the Thompson barn door found a new home, hanging above the entrance to Mike and Katherine's farmhouse. The traditional symbol of luck now watched over a home where two worlds had become one, much like its owners. The morning sun painted their kitchen in familiar gold as Katherine reviewed applications for the Rehabilitation Center's expanding program. 3 more veterans therapy groups want to join, she said, passing Mike his coffee. And the universities. Study on our water conservation methods is being published next month. Mike smiled, remembering when this kitchen had been a war room for their struggles. Now it was the heart of their shared life, where business plans mingled with breakfast and corporate strategies sat beside grocery lists. Through the window, they could see Starlight in her paddock, now accompanied by a dozen other horses in various stages of rehabilitation. The mare had become the center's ambassador, her story inspiring others to believe in second chances. Your father would be proud, Katherine said softly, watching Mike watch the land. We're not just preserving his legacy, we're growing it. The Conservation Trust had exceeded their hopes. 5 neighboring counties had adopted their model, protecting vital watersheds while supporting sustainable agriculture. The Thompson-Windsor approach was becoming a blueprint for rural development nationwide. Their wedding horseshoe still hung in the barn where they'd exchanged vows 3 months ago, witnessed by the community that had become family. Old Joe Henderson had cried. Sarah from the bank had caught the bouquet. Even Katherine's board chairman had traded his suit for boots to dance at the reception. But the real testimony to their success wasn't in awards or accolades. It was in the everyday miracle of the land, fertile fields nourished by protected waters, horses healing under careful hands, a community growing stronger through shared purpose. Ready for the next adventure? Mike asked, pulling Katherine close. She smiled, her hand resting unconsciously on her stomach, where their newest partnership was just beginning to show. As long as we're in it together. Outside, the morning mist rose from the fields their love had saved, promising another day of possibility in the place where a wounded horse had led 2 hearts home.